This is the Lifestyle Builders Podcast, Show 70, The Guy Behind the Guy with Andy and Nicole Hill.
Yeah, so he read Dave Ramsey's book and I did not. And then, he walked in the door and was like, we're going to start getting out of debt and we're going to, buy your car instead of leasing and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And I was like, whoa.
Sounds familiar.
And I feel like even 8 years later, knowing all of this about ourselves, knowing that he's the reader and I'm the, a little bit resistant at first. We know this dynamic about ourselves, but it still happens to this day where he'll read something and he'll get all gung-ho about it and he'll come to me and it takes me a while to be on board.
Hi, Ariana here with a quick PSA about why this topic is so important to us. Tom and I know how challenging it can be to start and run a business, to take care of your loved ones, and on top of it all, to keep a healthy relationship with your spouse. It isn't easy, and that is why we created our Lifestyle Builders Mentorship Program. As a special offer during this very special Couples and Entrepreneurship Month, we'd like to invite you to get started with your first month of Lifestyle Builders for only $1. So if you, and your spouse is welcome too, need more strategy, support, and guidance in your business and life, plus people who truly care about you and will keep you accountable, sign up now at tomandariana.com/LBcouples with the code LBcouples. A little bit more about our guests, Andy and Nicole. Andy Hill is the host of the Marriage, Kids, and Money podcast, which focuses on helping young families build wealth. Outside of writing for his own weekly blog of the same name, his personal finance-focused articles have been featured in Stand Magazine, Business Insider, NerdWallet, and Rockstar Finance. Trusted as a personal finance influencer by brands such as Quicken Loans, Tomorrow, and Credit Sesame, Andy's message of family financial empowerment has resonated with listeners, readers, and viewers across the U.S. When he's not talking money, Andy enjoys wrestling with his two kids and singing 80s karaoke with his wife, Nicole. Nicole Hill is a professional home organizer living in Metro Detroit. When she's not decluttering people's lives, she's raising her two young children and enjoying quality time with her husband of 8 years. In her spare time, she likes running races and learning new songs on her ukulele. All right, we had such a fun time getting to chat with Andy and Nicole. Andy, if you guys have been following the podcast, he's been on before as a guest. We were on Andy's podcast, but it was really cool to have his wife, Nicole, come on, who is not in the podcasting world, but she agreed to come on for this couple series.
Because not just in the podcasting world. She's not in the entrepreneurship
world, but she agreed to come on because we talked to her about, the perspective that she brings is just very important to hear from the spouse who's seeing all of these things from the outsider perspective and view and, can just bring a little bit of a different flavor to it all. Like, let us entrepreneurs know, what does it look like from the outside? What are we missing? What are some of those pieces that become issues in relationships that, you can resolve based on some of the things that they've had to overcome?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, and for every guest we bring on, what we look at doing for you guys is saying, what's the uniqueness that this couple can bring? And the big thing here is really Nicole's outside perspective. Mm-hmm. So not being into entrepreneurship, if you have a spouse who's not in your business, or if you have a spouse who's maybe not on board, I think part of what she brings is that perspective of like, what are we thinking and what are some of our fears? And whether it's you, the entrepreneur, or whether it's your spouse who's not really on board yet, you're going to get some really good gold here of how they're thinking to then be able to better align on what it is you guys want to build that lifestyle.
Yeah. And without further ado, we'll let you jump in and enjoy. All right, everyone, welcome back. We have got Andy and Nicole Hill here to talk all things couples and entrepreneurship with us. Thank you guys for coming on with us. We're so excited.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
I thought we were talking all kids, like marriage, kids, and money.
There you go. Good plug, my friend.
Well, you guys may recognize this guy because he has been on our show before and we have also been on his show. So we just love each other. That's all. But now he brought his lovely wife, Nicole, on to chat with us today, which we're so excited about because they have a different dynamic. Andy is the entrepreneur And Nicole is not an entrepreneur. So we are excited to dive into just some of the different things and struggles and stuff you guys have had to overcome, being in those two different directions.
Well, we're looking forward to chatting with you today.
Yeah. Hopefully
Well, I was gonna say,
we can help some other couples.
Absolutely. That's what it's all about. So I'm curious because Andy, when we had you on, the topic of the show was really, can I be an entrepreneur while still having a job? Mm-hmm. And so let's take it back before the entrepreneurship started, but just how did you and Nicole get together and then do some of the crazy things you did, like pay off your mortgage?
Yeah. Well, let's see. Well, I always say how we got together. I would love to hear how we got together from you if you're okay with that.
Yeah, sure. We got together through a Facebook poke.
Nice. That might be the first time I've ever heard that.
I love it.
We did have
who
a common
poked
friend. Oh, Andy poked.
Yeah.
Yeah. Poker.
You do look like a poker.
But we had a mutual friend, and I was living with her out in California, actually. Andy was still here in Michigan. And the funny thing is, Andy and I grew up in cities that were we were neighboring cities, 20 minutes apart. We knew some of the same people in high school, and we went to college at the same time, had the same major. We graduated in the same ceremony, but we never met each other until I lived in California and he lived here in Michigan.
That's crazy. Weird.
But yeah, he saw me in pictures of, his friend on Facebook, and then he poked me and I was like, oh, he's so cute. And he's a cool Midwest guy. And it's 9 months later, we were engaged. That's the long and the short of it.
I love it. You guys are so cute. I think that's the first time I've ever heard that. I got poked on Facebook, and 9 months later we were engaged to be married.
It was slightly after Friendster wasn't cool anymore. It was just Facebook was just starting to become mainstream. So the poke was pretty solid. Pretty solid move, actually.
I was gonna say I have a feeling the poke doesn't work as well these days.
Yeah. No.
Yes. I don't even think it's on there anymore.
I don't think you can replicate. It's a wave now. You wave.
That's right.
All right. So you guys got together, and then how did you, one of the big things that we found was that I was we met in college and we spent 4 years together and we were very aligned on things. But then eventually we got to a point where we kind of drifted, and I had this big picture of this life we're going to create. And then Ariana was like, I'm good with our traditional path. And so we ended up getting into a lot of debt, and then we worked really hard to pay it off. But it took us a lot of time to kind of get aligned on, we're going to make some sacrifices to pay the debt off to have that life. Mm-hmm. What did that look like for you guys? Were you always on the same page with some of the financial goals, or did that kind of take a path to get there?
Love the honesty.
No, I love that you guys are talking about that, because a lot of people, when you get married, you're not necessarily always on the same page, and you don't know if you are or aren't, because you go into all of these ventures together after you're married. We never talked about whether or not we would, what kind of discipline actions we would want to take with our children.
Mm-hmm.
And, luckily, we're both on the same page, and we don't spank and whatever. But we didn't talk about that before we got married. So had we gotten into this sticky situation, and it's a lot of the same stuff with money, we didn't necessarily talk about whether or not we would want to pay off our mortgage together until 5 years later when we were married. And then it became a topic of discussion. So no, in the beginning, I think we were both kind of just spending what we made. Mm-hmm. And at that point we got married, we had no idea what was ahead of us and what kind of discussions would be taking place in the course of the next 8 years.
Yeah. And furthermore, we both pursued careers that we just sort of fell into out of college. We both went and got communications majors because we didn't really know what we wanted to do. And then we both fell into roles doing what we were doing, and they were okay. We were making good money and having fun, but neither of which we were super overly passionate about. And with that came, a lot of decisions both on family and work that we had to make together. And you don't talk about that stuff when you're Facebook poking and flirting and flying back and forth to California to hang out and drink and have a party. And it's there's so many other questions and things we probably should have and could have talked about beforehand. And we're so lucky that 8 years later, we're still here smiling, because we do have a lot of differences. But I truly believe that those differences help us to be a better couple.
Yeah, we balance each other out.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But I think that the biggest turning point was that after I think it was, we had been married around 2 years, and he read a Dave Ramsey book. He loves self-help books. Shocker.
Yep. You and me.
You too. And do you get into them with him?
No. Nope.
Well, but I did get her going through Financial Peace University.
We did go through the program together, but we have figured out I have a very different idea of what reading is for.
Okay.
For me, reading is for pleasure and to learn. I don't find pleasure in learning by reading. So I love science fiction, fantasy novels, and I can legit binge read a good 6 books within like a week's time if I have time.
Awesome.
But when it comes to learning, I kind of have to do it in a different way. Like I can read a little bit, then I have to, go and implement or like go and take a life experience to figure out why that piece of information was important. Whereas he's very good at reading in all different places from all different books, and he can pull the concepts from different books together in his head to like make them make sense. For me, it's really difficult to do that. So I've stopped trying, and I figured out I can find other ways to learn. We don't have to do that. But if we can learn the same things together, that can help us have some of those conversations around money, around, how we want to raise our kids, around our relationship. So yeah, that's been it's been an interesting difference in between us, because a lot of entrepreneurs like to read a lot, and I'm like, well, I'm an entrepreneur now, but I still don't like to read.
But that's okay. You're getting it in different avenues, and then you guys are able to still have coercion that way.
Mm-hmm.
Or cohesion.
Something.
we go coerce at some points too.
Coercion as well.
He tries to coerce. It doesn't work all the time.
So Dave Ramsey.
So he read Dave Ramsey's book, and I did not. And then, he like walked in the door and was like, we're going to start getting out of debt, and we're going to, buy your car instead of leasing, and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And I was like, whoa,
Sounds familiar.
Like and I feel like even 8 years later, knowing all of this about ourselves, knowing that he's the reader and I'm the, a little bit resistant at first. We know this dynamic about ourselves, but it still happens to this day where he'll read something and he'll get all gung-ho about it, and he'll come to me, and it takes me a while to be on board. But usually it's for the better, and then, I think there's a few that you've read that I still don't agree with.
Yeah. I have the, and I don't know if this is for you, Tom, too. I have the, if it's written down in a book, then it's just the sole truth, and you have to believe every word of it, and you have to follow it to the T. When in fact, it's really just somebody's opinion, and you got to take the pieces and parts that you like and that work well for your family. And it's still taken me a long time to realize that, because I get very inspired by people I listen to or books that I read and I just want to do exactly or emulate the success that they had and move it forward. And sometimes, to my fault, I go ahead and do some of those things without talking to her. And that's where the marital problems start to happen. And that's one thing that I'm working on.
Mm-hmm. You are not alone. Let me just put that out there for both of you. We still have some of those same dynamic things where he forgets that I take a little bit more time to process things and to like kind of think about the idea and be okay with it, because he just gets inspired and we're going to do this and it's going to be amazing. Oh, no.
We're
not going to do that.
Clubs, you and
I. Yep, definitely. And he's very similar with the, he definitely reads a lot and wants to implement a lot of those concepts. And, I'm there to be that reminding factor of, these are our core values. These are this is the mission that we've talked about. So I'm not saying no, that those things won't work or that we can't do them. But what I'm saying is we need to figure out how to do them in our own way to make sure that we're staying with the things that we've said are important to us and making sure that we're continuing like to walk the talk. You know, for all the people that are following us, we're saying, oh, hey, you can have your life, your business, your way. We need to make sure that we're showing people that we're not just out there following the crowd and what other people are saying.
Well, and you know, it's interesting. I would imagine that everybody that reads a Dave Ramsey book probably has the same situation or reaction, right? Because what tends to happen and what we found time and time again is that one person will have like that epiphany or that aha moment, usually from like reading a book or having a new idea. And then we've kind of gone down a certain path to have that epiphany, but we just want our spouse to jump and have the epiphany right away without reading the book, without going through all the changes.
Right.
And, you know, Ariana talked about our core values now. We didn't used to have those. So we kept running into this situation. And then what we found was the more we talked about what we wanted our lives to look like, how we made decisions, how we wanted to be parents, now it's a lot easier that when a new idea comes in, instead of Ariana just saying no, we can both evaluate it against like what we want our lives to look like. And now it's more of a conversation to say, does it fit or not? Not so much like Tom's got the idea, Ariana says no.
Right.
I love that.
Yeah.
Because it's something you've already discussed beforehand, before you're in the heat of a moment of trying to figure out something that one of you might already be passionate or unpassionate about. So I love that you have the core values that have come out of a calm place where you guys have had the collaboration, and then you can go back to that.
Yeah, and it's taken us a while to, first of all, to even figure out that we needed them.
Oh, yeah.
Because, you know, people talk about like businesses having core values and like what's the bigger mission behind the business, but you can have them in your life too. And I think the more we thought about that, the more we were like, well, yeah, because we want to make sure that our business mission and our business core values matches our life mission and life core values. So it only makes sense to do the same exercise there. And then all those decisions, whether it's a life decision or a business decision, become that much easier because we're reviewing it back along those and saying, does this fit? Does this not fit? Does it feel right? Does it feel off? And instead of going back and forth, being like, oh, well, so-and-so is making millions of dollars and says we should do this. Well, it doesn't align with our core values, so it's a no. You know, and it's been a real struggle, I think, to be okay with saying that, because you get so many of those outside pressures on how you're running your business, how you're running your marriage, how you're raising your kids. It's tough sometimes to get rid of those like little devil voices standing on your shoulders saying, oh, you're being a bad mom and you're not being a good wife. And, you know, it's like, no, shush. I know I'm being perfectly fine because I know what our values are and we've talked about it. So we're good. I don't need to listen to anybody else.
That's good. It's a good way to center yourself. Absolutely. And I'm not sure we have them written down, but I think that's a great assignment for us.
I was
maybe as a family.
We have homework.
But what she does for me when I get all jacked up and excited about things, she tends to remind me not just, hey, no, that's a dumb idea or I don't like that. It's, hey, how does that align with the long-term vision that you keep describing to me, Andy, on all the things that you want out of life? And then it's essentially her just saying it back to me and then me realizing, and then I come to that epiphany myself, as opposed to, you know, where I get all mad, you know, oh, my wife's trying to take away my dreams. But it's like, no. She's actually reminding you what your dreams are and helping you to get better. So that's something that, again, always working on.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, and that's a great takeaway too, because what I've always found is that, you know, if I bring up an idea and Ariana immediately like says no or like starts poking holes, I see us like adversarial to where times where she says just like that's a fantastic question, because now it's putting it back on me to say, hey, you've got this idea, think about it and tell me how it aligns. And more often than not, it doesn't. But if I can come to that on my own rather than her telling me, it's a very different conversation at that point.
Well, and I think, Nicole, that's a really important role that you play for Andy, as like, you're not involved in his business, but it's a part of your lives as one big unit. Yeah. So you are even playing a role, even though you're not a part of the business, by making sure you're asking him those questions and kind of helping him stay on track. You're like the accountability partner from the marriage and a little bit for the business as well. And I think, you know, it's a tough role to play as the spouse who's not involved, because it's very easy for the entrepreneur to get defensive and say, well, you don't understand my business, or you didn't hear this person say it, or you aren't in this world, you just don't know. It doesn't matter, because you know what he's trying to do, what the mission he's trying to achieve, and what his business stands for. So it doesn't matter how many details you know, you're just there to ask a question and to support him in whatever direction he decides to take it. And I think that's a really cool role. And it sounds like you do it really well.
Oh yeah.
I try.
She keeps me in line.
Oh yeah. Like you said, just to add on to that, I think I have the bigger picture. He's more in the weeds. And so sometimes it's nice to, have a sounding board that has the bigger picture in mind, because it's easier for me to see the goal or the path, instead of getting sidetracked in all these details that he's bogged down with. So
Absolutely. So when he came to you and said, I want to start this business, and I don't even know how it went, but like when he came to you with that idea, like how did that go? Because, it sounds like that was not necessarily in the path or the vision. So what did that look like?
I remember specifically it was like, in the morning, he woke up from, he must have been pondering this in his brain for weeks. And he woke up and he's like, I don't even know how to say this, but I'm going to start a podcast. And I was like, okay, all right. Honestly, I will be, this is a little bit of a truth bomb. There are days where Andy does not enjoy his job. And even though he'll say, on air, and he's a positive guy, and, he will tell you if you meet him on the street that he loves his job, there are days where I get to see him come home and he's not fulfilled. And so when he said he was going to start this podcast, there was no question in my mind that I wanted him to be able to do it, because I wanted him to have something that would fulfill that void that he's not getting at his 9 to 5. So, there was never a question. Now, of course, the first and second and third things that went through my mind are, oh my gosh, we're going to lose more time with him. Is he still going to help me around the house? How is this going to affect our, family life and marriage and everything? But it really wasn't a choice. It was, I wanted him to have that, so what are you going to do? You make sacrifices.
Yeah. And I think that's really important that you pointed that out too, because as we know, and we're trying to show people, it's not all unicorns and rainbows, it's not all happy, perfect life. There are times where, things change and you have to go through those growing pains, and you have to kind of sit down and refigure things out. Like, how is it going to work now that we're adding this other element in? But it sounds like you guys really kind of talk through some of that stuff. Because I know when we had Andy on the podcast, we talked about like, how is it trying to integrate or balance all of those things that you've got going on, the job, the business, the, marriage relationship, and then the relationship as a family with your kids. That's a lot of moving balls. And, he really talked through like, hey, this is how it is. We have set our boundaries. We've set the family time. And then I know when my specific business time is and all of that stuff. So it sounds like you guys talked through that. How did it sort of evolve for you as that when he first had the idea for the podcast? What did it look like those, first 3 to 6 months afterwards as you were figuring things out?
Well, I think I completely underestimated what it would take to actually produce a podcast or a good one, a consistent one where you show up weekly, you've got good content, and you've got good interviews, people you're bringing on that bring great value. In the beginning, I thought, hey, you just get on a microphone and you just talk, right? and that's cool. You can do that, and that's great. But I underestimated the amount of time it would take to put together something good. And with that underestimation, I started to talk to Nicole about, hey, what's the possibility of like you and the kids disappearing for 5 or 6 hours on a Saturday? And that didn't fly.
You just imagine that conversation.
I think it was like one weekend. I'm like, so maybe if you just like kind of like weren't here on Saturday afternoons every weekend, what do you think about that? She's like, okay, so we don't see you all week because you're at work. And then on the weekends, you want us to disappear? How does that work? So lo and behold, I learned other ways that I could still figure out a way to do this and maybe my goals of creating something so large so quickly were pulled back a little bit. But you know what? I am so happy that I didn't go down that path, because if I severely affected my relationship with my wife or my kids, that's the whole point of the show that I do. It's about your relationship with your wife and your kids. How ironic, or how whatever oxymoronic that is, like, right? It's so I'm glad that I found ways to make it happen. Early mornings, evenings, yes, the Sunday night before the show goes live. Craziness. So, there are times, and, I'm not excited about it, but, hopefully it changes in the future, where I'm sitting on my laptop and I'm cranking out the show to get it out on Monday, and she's catching up on Handmaid's Tale or something like that.
I love that show.
So good.
So good.
But, it's not every night. It's, one night a week where it's like, hey, I'm going to be up a little late doing this. And I think we've worked it out okay, and amongst doing everything.
Lots of trial and error.
Yeah. Well, and I think it comes back to that whole like compromise. You wanted this amazing podcast, and Nicole wants you home as a dad and as a husband. So it was finding that happy medium for both of you of how can we have a little bit of the best of both worlds without, crushing your dream of the podcast, or without you crushing your family's dream of having you available and present, to be with them.
Yeah, well, and it is such an important point too that you made, where when we talk to like entrepreneurs or people that are trying to like start a business, we usually ask them like, why do you want to do this? Like, we want to understand before we get in. And 9 times out of 10, it's like to build a better life for my family. Yet what happens more often than not is that we then, as the entrepreneur, we want to go like full speed, and we end up like missing out and sacrificing our family in order to hopefully get back to them later on when the business hopefully works, right? Like all these hopefullys.
Yeah.
But what we found is that you can do both. Like we have multiple roles as spouses, as potentially parents, as like, our careers and our businesses. But by figuring out what you want and then having those conversations about what's the right time frame and speed, because if it takes 2 more extra years to get there, but in the meantime, like now you get to spend time with your kids growing up. Now you got to make sure that you had a strong marriage and relationship throughout the way. Like I would take that all day, every day, compared to hustle. And now I come back and I've got to try to fix this broken relationship because I haven't been there as like a husband or a father.
Right. It's finding that perfect balance.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for me, we talked about the job thing a little bit. I just remember a couple of years ago, and it was sort of part of the impetus of me kind of jumping into it. I remember we had one day where new management came in, and all of a sudden it was like, all right, Andy, you're on a different team. You have a different title. You're losing the people that were reporting to you, and you're reporting to somebody else. And 2 years later, everything's worked out. It's a good job. It's stable. It provides me income, but it did scare the heck out of me. I was like, all right, we have one income, and, because we've chosen to do the stay-at-home mom thing, and it's been great. I love it. But that scared the heck out of me. Like, okay, these new folks could all of a sudden decide they don't like me, or I'm not the flavor of the week anymore. And I need to figure out a way to put in another set of income somehow where I'm putting more legs on my stool a little. So that's kind of what fired me up a little bit. And you're right, though. It's like, okay, in order to spend more time with my family and create that, I'm going to spend less time with my family. It's crazy. But I mean, I don't know. I felt the calling, and I felt like, hey, this is the thing that I should do and can do, and I have a passion around. I think I can be successful at it. It's just going to take a little bit of marital coordination to get there.
Well, I was going to say, I think when we look at it, at least the way I saw it, it was like the end justified the means. It's like my family's so important, and I don't want to miss out on like 45 years of having to work somewhere. So just putting in this little time will then allow that. But what I've learned over the years was that it doesn't have to be an either or. It's like, how do we do both together? Yeah. And like, I mean, we like this year, even though like, we can grow our business bigger and we will continue to do so, we decided that we're going to take Fridays off and do Friday family field trips. And, some people are like, oh my gosh, it's amazing that you guys can do that. And it's like, well, most people can do more of what they want to do in their life. They just don't ask the question of like, how could I make this happen now? And, maybe it doesn't look the same as it would in the future, but there's always ways for us to start living more intentionally now. And I think most of us, when we're working a job, we just kind of forget about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and it's also, you've designed your business in a way where you guys are being successful, but you also designed your finances in a way where you're not worried about debt payments all the time too. So that's a big part of it. When you get rid of a lot of that debt in your life, you have more flexibility to have a budget that fits well with taking Fridays off with your family. That's
yeah.
cool.
Well, and another thing too, I'll just, building off of what you said earlier, Nicole, and Andy and I actually talked about it when we were running like up the Rocky Steps in Philly. Andy said,
this is my running buddy. I don't know if I told you that.
Yeah. But Andy said, Tom, I kind of feel like a little bit of a lie because I don't like love my job. Like I'm just like loving to go to it. He's like, but it's good. Like I enjoy it, but there are those kind of ups and downs. And I think what's important, and I learned was, even if you love something now, Andy, your story just articulated it beautifully. Any number of things could change, which now suddenly change your circumstances. Mm-hmm. So what I see with like what you guys are doing and what so many other people are doing is you're setting yourselves up with options so that if something does change, you have the option to do this or that or something else rather than being like, okay, well now I'm stuck. I'm throttled with debt, so I've got to keep this job to be able to pay it. And I can't find another job because I'm spending all my time at this job. And then you get to like a really bad point for yourselves. And then, that starts impacting like the family and everything else. So that's a really good point that even if you're happy with things now, setting up, these other things of paying off debt and maybe having another income coming in, definitely just make things easier.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nicole's even doing that lately for the family over the past 6 months. She started working part-time as a professional organizer. So something that she's passionate about, that she's brought to not only to her heart to make her feel really good, but also to help the family in providing more income too, just in case anything happens, like you say.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that some of that story too just hits on me because, people talk about like, oh, I don't love my job and I don't want to work there, or I don't want to do this all the time. And I think one of the things that you have to almost reframe or look at it from a different perspective is you're not going to love what you're doing all the time, 24/7. Like I don't love being an entrepreneur all the time. We have ups and downs just like you would in a job. I don't always love being a parent. Sometimes our kids drive me nuts and I'm just like, somebody take them for the day, please. But it's, you have to take the good and the bad together. And I think until you realize that about everything in your life, there's always going to be things that you're unhappy about and that are causing you to look elsewhere for that happiness. But that's not the solution. You have to look within and figure out, well, what about this is making me unhappy? And can I maybe change my circumstances a little bit so that I'm less unhappy about the situation? I mean, you guys paying off your mortgage and really taking care of that debt, that's something that weighs on a lot of people. Now it doesn't weigh on you, and it gives you options. You have options in your life to change some of those things that were making you unhappy before. Having a business gives us options to sort of, oh, well, I have more fun in the business than I would in a real job. So I'm happier owning a business, even though it has those bad days sometimes, and I think, a lot of people forget that the grass is always greener. They're always peeking over somebody else's fence and saying, oh, that's amazing, I'm going to do that. Right. You're going to get just as many bad days doing that thing over there. What about that's going to make your life as a whole different and make you happier?
Absolutely. Yep. Great point.
So I'm curious, people around you, friends and family, do they understand like, Andy, what you do, or Nicole, like, do they ever ask like, what's this podcast thing?
Oh, the perfect example is he was talking to a family member just this past weekend and talking about his podcast. And she's like, yeah, that's great, but that doesn't make you any money. And he's like, well, actually, it makes a little, and there's potential for it to be a real business. And then she perked up, then she was like, oh, really? And then she like took it more seriously. I think before knowing anything, people assume it's just like a pet project, on the side, but it's an actual business. Most of my family doesn't quite understand it.
Let alone explaining to people what a podcast is. I know you guys have that difficulty too, where you're like, hey, we have a podcast. What's a podcast? Or how do we get it on my phone? So it's like not only explaining how it can make money, but how how people can even listen to one. So
I am going to be honest. I'm a little happy that most of my family doesn't know how to listen to it because I did not grow up talking about money. That's like talking politics.
Yeah.
You know? And so it's a little unnerving for me to know that our information is out there. And it's becoming so normal for Andy because he's in this world where you just talk about it all the time. And I think his sense of what's normal is getting skewed to the extreme.
Yeah.
But that's good. He loves talking about it. I see him light up. But I'm okay with talking to strangers or to folks like you who are also in the industry and talk about it openly. But for my family, like I'm not going to walk into the next, 80-person family Christmas dinner and be like, we paid off our mortgage. It would, that would go over like
not well.
Well, and I think the real power too is obviously, Andy, the more you get into it, the more you get excited. And then, with your podcast and not even what it's done now, but what you're going to do in the future, like it's legit changing people's lives. Mm. But as you said, Nicole, even when I pulled Ariana in, there's times where now we both get sucked in too much where sometimes it's tough to see from the outside. Where I think that's the really good perspective that you can bring back to it, because there's times where like we'll start going down a rabbit hole and then I'll step back and I'll be like, well, what would Ariana of a couple years ago say? And I'm like, we're completely off of
that.
This.
Or we'll think about what would our family and friends have to say about this? Or like what thoughts would be going through their head if they were listening to it? Just to kind of bring us back to what the everyday person, if they've never heard about owning your own business or never heard a podcast before and they were to happen upon it, what would they be thinking, while we were in the midst of that episode? And I think that just allows us to remember that everyone that you speak to is at a different point in their journey. So if you can help them relate to it from a different point of view or a different perspective, then maybe it isn't so foreign to them anymore. Maybe it isn't so outside of the norm, because that has happened a lot. We've been in the entrepreneurship game for 10 years now. We've been married for 10 years this September and been parents for 6 years. So it's like all of these things that are normal to us are foreign to people out there that maybe haven't done those things yet. So sometimes we have to remember and check ourselves on. We talk very openly about marriage and relationship and money and business and kids and parenting. And that is going to be weird for some people because in society, there are a lot of things that you just don't talk about with people you don't know, or even with your own family sometimes because it's considered taboo or awkward.
And now we're just broadcasting it over the internet.
Broadcasting it publicly everywhere.
I'm curious, has that affected any of your relationships?
I think it has to a point. So in our families, we have a lot of crazy different family dynamics going on, which we won't get into on this episode, but when we chat sometime, we'll give you the insider info. I think some of the people in our family have adjusted to it better just based on their own personal experiences or life experiences, what they've seen or done. And then, different environments that they had been brought up in. So some things were talked about, some things weren't. Some things people are normal seeing like, oh, we opened a real estate business. We opened a wine and liquor store. Those are actual businesses that you can walk in. The whole online thing threw people for a loop. I think people in our family still don't actually understand what we do. But I think some of the hardest parts were like the friendships. Because family's family, you're going to go through your ups and downs. You have that connection by biological blood or by the fact that they've been your family for, since you were born, even if they're not related. But the friendships have definitely come and gone over the years. And I think part of that was where we were in our relationship. We were a little bit ahead of everyone we knew. We knew we were going to get married in college. We got married 2 years out of college. We bought a house together. We had kids before anyone else had kids. So we were kind of going through these life experiences before other people were. So it was hard to relate to us. And then when we threw the businesses in, all hell broke loose. I think people just weren't on the same level, and we weren't really on their level anymore. And, just our priorities changed. Yeah. So we have definitely gotten smaller in number of friends that we have known for a long time. But I think we've also had the benefit of finding so many new people to connect with via the online space and the entrepreneur space. And it's just been really amazing to see, some of the relationships that we've been able to have with people that maybe we've only met once in real life, but because we are all kind of at that same level and we can talk on Zoom and, just chat with each other anywhere, we've been able to create some close friendships that you normally wouldn't think possible, I guess.
Yeah. Right.
And I think the other thing with this too, it's forced us to do a lot of work on ourselves and, each of us kind of, improving who we are and working through some of the stories or challenges we faced, as well as in our relationship. Mm-hmm. And especially now, we've got our podcast out there. We're in the midst of writing our first book, which is going to be in bookstores a year from now. So one of the things, thank you. But so one of the things that we've been talking about as part of that is we have more people that now know who we are, and more people that are now going to hear our story and kind of be in our space. So we've had to make sure that we're individually, as well as as parents and as spouses, comfortable with kind of the next phase we're moving into. Mm-hmm. And, with that, there's going to be haters that come along. There's going to be people that just want to tear you down. So we've had to do a lot of work, I think, on us personally to make sure that we're strong and our foundation's strong, so that whatever storms and things come up in the future, we're good to navigate through that.
But the information that you share and, the topic of money and how you guys feel towards money, have you ever felt that some of your friends who may listen may feel as though they don't want to talk to you? Maybe
I'm sure
they just bought $1 million home and they don't want you to judge them for not being able to truly afford it. Or have you found those kind of things?
Yeah, I think because we talk so much about what is truly important to you and diving into what that looks like, because ultimately you don't know what you want your life to look like until you understand that. Mm-hmm. And I think because we have gone through the whole we downsized our vehicle. We sold a really nice car because we decided it wasn't important to us. We live in the same house that we lived in 10 years ago. We don't buy a lot of new things or, take expensive vacations. And, as we start to talk about those things, I don't know if anyone's really come up and said it, but I know that there are people that have kind of drifted away a little bit because we've changed our priorities and are open about it. And, not that we're ever telling people to make someone else feel judged about their choices. But one thing we always talk about is, usually when someone comes out online and has something to say about something you are doing or saying, it's saying more about them and their feelings than it really is about you, because obviously something triggered them. Something you said made them have a reaction that they felt they need to come and tell you about, whether it's angrily or nicely. So a lot of times, not that I want people to be in that uncomfortable space. It's almost, I feel it's necessary for us to share that stuff, because if we don't say that and no one around them ever says that, they may sit there for the rest of their lives, never realizing that they're striving for things that aren't really all that important to them if they really took a deeper look and didn't maybe take so much from the outside world and the judgment that comes with it.
Well, I was going to say that point you hit on there is so important. As people start reacting to what you're saying, a lot of people take that personally, especially when you're sharing personal stuff your marriage. One of the things we're trying to really change and make more people aware of is that we go to a marriage counselor, and that's not to say that their marriage must be on the rocks. No, it's look,
pretty good.
our marriage is the most important thing in our lives. And if you look at athletes, when they want to be at the top of their game, what do? They get a coach. And when you want to improve in business, what do? You get a coach. We said, why are we not applying that same thing to our lives? So we very openly will scream that hey, we go to a marriage counselor, not because it's on the rocks, but it's because it's important to us. So what we find is that when we share these things, we're sharing them to help inspire people. And so, like, it could be the same exact message. And some people could come and try to tear us down, whereas other people could come and be like, thank you.
Mhm.
And I mean, the majority of the time, it's people coming and saying, like, thank you for saying that. And then you got the one or two that want to tear us down. But guess what? They're tearing us down because they're not happy with where they're at.
Mhm.
And they're not comfortable with that. So, I think that's been a big realization that we've had to kind of have. And anyone that puts themselves out there is going to have to figure that out, because you are going to have people that aren't going to like what you say.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to prepare yourself for those uncomfortable conversations when it's not just a stranger on the internet, but it's a friend, a close friend of yours that comes right and is in your face and like blatantly asking you something and you have to respond, or when it's a family member who may have caught a podcast or something and then comes in, whoa, you paid off your mortgage. It's not always going to be fun to have to deal with those things. And it's kind of a part of life that comes along at certain points. But I think, you can't change what other people think about you. Ultimately, they're going to have their own conclusions. They're going to have their own opinions. If you're comfortable with where you are and what you're doing, you just have to remember that and come back to it anytime you're in one of those uncomfortable situations. And as much as it sucks to lose friends over things that seem really trivial or silly, it really just makes you appreciate and realize how important your close friends are that have stood by you no matter what, and the family that has stood by and supported you no matter what. It's to each their own.
Absolutely.
I appreciate that perspective, because sometimes as the person who's not in the business, I'm worried that sometimes what he's saying on the podcast will be taken a certain way from friends or family members, the few that do know how to listen. And I'm afraid that the message of, hey, we paid off our mortgage will come out to them as, you're bad if you don't pay off your mortgage too.
Yeah.
And so I do think about that sometimes when people come up to me and say, hey, I listened to Andy's podcast.
You're like, oh no,
the first thing is shock, like fear that goes through me, because I'm like, oh shoot, what did they hear? But I like your perspective. You know what? People are going to think what they want. I can't change that. And the friends who are true and good friends are going to support us and know that we're not judging them. So
yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So I got one quick thing I want to get onto here. So Andy, how did you figure out where that line was of what you could share and what you can't? Because with us both being in the business, it's pretty clear we're kind of both in it.
Yeah.
But
we share whatever
with the
we
two
know.
of you, where did you figure out where that line was, or have you?
I'll be honest with you. We say
Homework number
Nicole's
two?
Nicole's not in the business, but she's very much a part of my counsel, I guess, when we talk about things.
I'm the guy behind the guy.
She's the So,
That's
I mean,
the title. The guy
a lot
behind
of the
the
things
guy.
a lot of the things that I share are very personal, right? I mean, stuff we're talking about today is very personal. And when I feel like it's getting to that line of like, okay, well, would Nicole feel comfortable about us talking about us going to marriage counseling? Maybe I should talk to her about that before, I talk about that.
Disclosing.
I talked to her. And she said,
you weren't supposed to say that. No, I'm totally kidding. Watch out for episode 100 of Andy's podcast.
I saw that. So
What it's going to
exciting.
be all about.
but I mean, were those big things like, I'm open about our debt payoff, or I'm open about how we were able to pay off the mortgage. And I don't want to just say, hey, we paid off the mortgage. I want to provide as much detail as possible in a post so somebody can say, okay, I see how he did it, and that will help me to figure out how I can do it. But with that, I want to make sure my wife is okay with it, because it does share some very personal stuff. And I'm not sure if I went into this blind. I think I did go into it blind. I didn't do any sort of anonymous name or anything like that. I'm Andy Hill, and I just went at it. I'm not like blogger guy 453. Like it's, I'm just throwing it out there. And maybe I should have gone anonymous, but I didn't. I felt like it was important for it to be a real person.
A real person.
About their real problems and their real solutions and the things that they're learning. I'm no expert whatsoever. Like the whole purpose of my podcast is to talk to very smart people who've done incredible things and then help draw that for myself as well as the people who are listening. So it's a learning opportunity for me. It's like a personal finance MBA. I love it, man. It's great.
I love that. So I just want to pull out one point before we wrap things up and ask you guys your advice for the listeners. Nicole, I think you brought to light something that I don't know if many entrepreneurs realize. You're the middle person between the public and Andy's business, that they probably don't feel comfortable asking him questions or kind of diving in, but they're comfortable asking you those questions. So I feel like you've probably had to figure out what a good place is for you to be kind of like that middle person of all of these people are coming up to me asking about Andy and Andy's podcast and the business. And like, maybe they are more comfortable asking you like, oh, well, does this podcast actually make any money than like going up to him and asking him that question. So how have you kind of dealt with or figured out how to like manage being the go-between between Andy and like your family and friends and the people in your community and stuff like that?
I mean, I don't get that many questions. I kind of, maybe as it grows and has more recognition, I will get more. But when they bring it up, it's more so just like, how is it doing? And I'll just say he's having a blast. And but you know what? No one's asked me any questions about it making any money or anything like that. So I know it's kind of a lackluster response. I wish there was more juice I could give you.
Hey, this is about real life. So if that's what happens in real life. All right. Well, I think I would love to hear, I know we covered a lot of different things, but I'd love to hear if you both have your own, what's one piece of advice or one thing you want people to take away from your particular story and your episode here with us today?
You want me to go first?
You first.
Well, I would say, since this is all about couples and entrepreneurship, I would say if you're excited about something as the entrepreneur, you have to want to make it work, both for you personally, for that self-care, for that great goal-hitting thing that's in your brain, but you also have to make it work for your family. You have to make it work for your spouse. So they might not be involved in the business, like my wife's not involved in the business, but she's very much involved in the business because the whole point of me, pursuing this venture, developing the podcast, and all the work that's gone into it is for her, is for the kids. It's for me too, to feel great as a person. But with that self-care, I think I could be a great husband. And with that self-care, I could be a great dad. So involving your wife, your spouse, in the decision-making process, in how much information you want to share, how much time you're going to spend on this adventure, super important. Do not think twice about it.
I love it. And Nicole, anything to share, or you just agree with what Andy put out there?
Oh no, I've got my own thoughts. Yes. Let's see. I think I will speak to the spouse who may be the spender, the spouse who may be, not the one who's always propelling things forward and reading self-help books. I'm going to speak to the, my mirror image and say, if you're not moving forward, then you're moving backward. By standing still, you're moving backward. I have to remind myself of that. So, and what I mean by that is when Andy comes to me with, or if your spouse comes to you with new thoughts and ideas, even though your initial response may be resistance or to keep things as they are, to try to be open to new ventures because it takes you amazing places. I never would have been the one to say, let's buy our cars, let's own our home outright, let's, see if we can both not have full-time jobs by the time we're 40. But man, here we are, and like at the verge of something amazing. And if I had resisted and stood still, then we wouldn't be here. So
I love that. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think there's a lot of people out there that need to hear that. All right. And where is the best place for them to reach out and talk to you guys? Andy, I know you have a website, but even Nicole, how can they reach out and talk to you if maybe they're the other spouse that needs some support and a friend?
Absolutely. Well, if you could go to marriagekidsandmoney.com, that's the website. The podcast is called Marriage, Kids, and Money and can be found on any major podcast player. If you do want to chat with Nicole, I'll have you go to the website, marriagekidsandmoney.com, and shoot us a note in the Contact Us page. I know that Nicole and I, again, a lot of the questions that I get for the show, I bounce off her because it's her, it's both of our lives. So if you had any questions for her, please reach out on that website too.
Awesome. All right, you guys, it's been another awesome episode with Tom and Ariana, your hosts and lifestyle builders. And we want to extend a very special thank you to you, Andy and Nicole, especially you for coming on the show and sharing all of that stuff with us today. I think it's going to be a really, really good episode for people to listen in on.
Excellent. We're super excited to be here, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys for having us on. This was fun. And I have one last question for you guys.
Sure.
When can we have a drink with you?
Oh my gosh, definitely needs to happen. I don't know if we can make it happen in person. That would be amazing. But otherwise, we will have a virtual drink with you anytime.
I was going to say, you can come to Orlando next month.
Yeah.
She'll be there.
You guys live in Orlando?
No.
We're coming down for FinCon.
Oh, right.
She'll be there Saturday through Wednesday.
All right. So the answer is 1 month from now.
There you go.
Will you guys be there on Wednesday, though?
I think we come in on Wednesday, so we'll have to see if we can meet up before you head out.
Wednesday
that
night.
Would be great.
Wednesday night.
Right.
All right. We will definitely coordinate it.
Cool.
And so for anyone listening, this is a great example of why you should go your life, your business, your way. We'll see you next time.
Bye. Hey, we hope you enjoyed this episode. If you know another entrepreneur who may benefit from hearing this show, we would so appreciate you being a good friend and sharing it with them. And just a reminder, as a special offer during this super special Couples in Entrepreneurship Month, we'd like to invite you to get started with your first month of Lifestyle Builders for only $1. Sign up now at tomandariana.com/LBcouples with the promo code LBcouples. Are you a Lifestyle Builders podcast fan? We'd love to hear from you. Head on over to tomandariana.com/iTunes and leave us a review.